Very warm welcome to the Rev Dr James Harding.
Wonderful, thank you, Miles, although I don't know if I put them in that order. And I don't know whether you're wearing the shirt in solidarity or in sympathy. Well, we're in week 2 of a new sermon series. The sermon series is on the Sermon on the Mount, the greatest sermon that Jesus ever preached, the greatest sermon the world has ever heard. And you remember last week, Pastor Miles took out a telescope and he gave us this wonderful overview of those so important first 12 verses of Matthew 5. Matthew 5, verses 1 to 12, the Beatitudes, the blessed attitudes of how we are called to live and do life in the kingdom of God. And today, I want to just take out a microscope and focus in just on one verse. The next verse, Matthew chapter 5, verse 13. And this verse is about Jesus teaching his followers, his disciples, his friends, you, how to live life in his kingdom. How we should engage with and interact with, how we should action and relate and influence the world in which we live and the people with which you meet. So our verse today is Matthew chapter 5, verse 13, and it says this: you, Jesus is talking to you here. Jesus says a lot about I am this, I am that. Today he's saying you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt has lost its taste, its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. And Jesus is saying that is what you are like. You are the salt. Jesus is using a really powerful metaphor here to describe the effect or the action or the influence that a Christian should have on the people around them, on the world in which they live. He says you should have the same kind of effect or influence. You should do the same thing, have the same action as salt. You should do the same thing as salt does. You are the salt of the earth. But what does that mean? And how can we be salty? How can we shake out that salt on the people around us? How do we do that? Well, I'm going to try and help us get to grips with that today. How can we be salty Christians? And I've heard that's like what the kids say, and I don't mean it like how the kids say it. I was told by some youth today, I'll explain it later. I don't know where I'm going with that now. At about 8 p.m. every evening in my house, you will see the biggest difference there is between my wife, Katie, my wonderful wife, Katie, and myself. You see, at about 8 p.m. after the kids have eaten dinner and they've got food all over the floor and themselves and all over me, and after we've had bath time and they've got shampoo and soap all over the floor and themselves and all over me, and after they've been put to bed, or at least they should be in bed, and they've drained every last ounce of energy out of me, you know what it's like, parents. You will observe then, in my home, a phenomena, which is the biggest difference between me and my wife that there is. The biggest difference of opinion. At 8 p.m., Katie will get straight to work, tidying up, cleaning up, wiping things down, washing up. And at 8 p.m., I just want to sit down on the sofa, lay back and go, "Hey, Katie, get me a cup of tea." And then I wake up realizing that I would never dare do that in real life. And And I just want to have just 5 minutes on the sofa, doing nothing, trying to get some energy back. But the stuff doesn't tidy itself up, does it? The stuff doesn't clean itself up. If you don't wash up, if you don't sweep up, the kitchen doesn't just magically clean itself, will it? In fact, things seem to get worse. It's just the way things are. I mean, it's the same with our gardens. I know some of you are keen gardeners. I've seen your Facebook pictures. And it's the same with the garden. You do nothing with the garden, and the weeds will grow. And the insects will eat your veggies. You do nothing, and the flowers won't just magically come back. It's the same with emails, right? You go on holiday for a week, you put on your out of office, the emails don't stop. They just keep coming in, and they just build up, and your admin load gets worse and worse. You see, there's something about human life, human existence, that when it's just left to itself, when it's left to its own devices, it inevitably starts to decay and disintegrate. Things, when left to their own devices, they start to smell a bit. And then they start to rot a bit. And eventually, when left to their own devices, those things will start to poison us. When we are left to be in control of our own lives, that's when they start to fall apart. Just think about it for a moment. Let's not even get all spiritual yet. Let's just think about our own bodies. I've recently turned 40, and I've noticed my body's not the same as what it used to be like. What's the natural tendency of our bodies as we grow older? What happens as we age to our bones and our joints and our skin and our hair and our strength? As we get older, that normal process of aging begins, and we literally and physically start falling apart, or at least that's how I found it. And that's what aging is, until one day we absolutely fall apart, and that's dying. And it's not a nice thing to think about, is it? But it's the very thought that drives the cosmetic industry and the beauty industry. But it's just natural. It's the way things are. It's the way of the world. It happens to us. It happens to animals. It happens to plants. It happens to flowers. It's so normal and natural. It even happens to mighty rocks that erode away to form sand. And it's the same with relationships. It's the same with friendships. It's the same with marriages. If you do nothing to invest into your friendship, into your marriage, it'll eventually fall apart. And it's the same with ourselves and our well-being and our thoughts. If we just stay in bed all day watching TV and don't invest in our emotional health, things start to fall apart. We become anxious and maybe even depressed. It's just the natural tendency of the world. Scientists in the church, you will notice that this is a law, the second law of thermodynamics, or the law of entropy. When you leave things to themselves, they start falling apart. But let's get spiritual now, because we're in church, and we're not just called to be physical beings, but spiritual beings. And the scriptures say that God has set eternity, the things of the Spirit, into our hearts. And the scriptures say that God created us to be loved by Him and to love Him and to be in a relationship with Him. So let's get spiritual. How are we going to stop our spiritual lives from falling apart? How are we going to stop our faith lives from starting to stink? What we need, what this world needs, is the kind of salt that Jesus is talking about in Matthew 5:13. And you, Jesus says, you are that salt. You are the salt that this world needs. The world needs you. And Jesus says, shake out that salt. Shake it out. Are you ready to learn 5 different ways that we can shake out that salt together today? Yeah, you ready? Good. Now you might be thinking, oh, but James, I don't just want to be plain old, boring, ordinary salt. I want to be something more exciting. Why can't I be the gold dust of the world? Why can't I be the plutonium of the earth or the liquid magma of the earth? Something more exciting. But Jesus calls us to be the ordinary, normal, everyday stuff that the world really needs. Let's face it, in the spice rack of life, the paprikas and the turmerics tend to get left in the cupboard and only come out once a month at best, unless you're more adventurous in cooking than me. But the salt is always there on the table, always ready. It's like the salt's on the table saying, oh, it's breakfast, back off Chinese 5-spice, I've got breakfast covered. It's like the salt's there on the table saying, lunch, no problem, I'm all over it, literally. Salt is such a basic, ordinary, everyday thing. And here's 5 reasons why Jesus wants you to be salty. Reason number 1, the world is decaying and you are the salt. You are the preservative. Guess what? Back in the time of Jesus, they didn't have deep freezers or refrigerators. Back in the ancient Near East, they didn't have Ziploc bags or vacuum packs. And so the only way to stop your food from decaying was to salt it, was to rub salt into your meat and to rub salt into your fish. And that salting process, it's sometimes called curing. That cure with salt would stop things from decaying and rotting. It would keep it fresh, stop it from smelling, and stop it from ultimately poisoning you. And Jesus is saying, that's what I'm calling you to do. You are the salt. I want you to be like that. You are the salt, you are the cure, you are the preservative for the world. But how can we preserve this world? Well, how does that salt cure work? Salt, it draws out the moisture and it dries out the bacteria. It dries out that bacteria that turns food foul and makes it smell and makes it rot and starts to poison you. And you are like a salt cure for the world when you help draw out that harmful spiritual bacteria from your friends, from your family, from the people around you. The Bible calls it by that funny old-fashioned name, sin. Sin is just like a spiritual spoilage bacteria. It makes things rot, it makes things stink, and eventually it poisons you. And so a salty Christian is someone who helps draw out the sin, draws out that spiritual spoilage bacteria out of the people around them. It helps them bring it up to the surface. It helps them identify it and deal with it and take it to the cross and to name it and to own it and to deal with it. A salty Christian draws out those thoughts and habits and action that destroys and decays and makes life stink. And so being salty means that you help people find forgiveness for sin, forgiveness, the cure that only comes from Jesus Christ and his death and resurrection, you as the salt help bring people to the cross. And that means that you are what this world needs. You are the salt. So shake out that saltiness. Number 2, life can be bland, but you are the salt. You are the flavor enhancer of life. Now, I'm not talking Chinese MSG here. Let's not go crazy about this. But I'm talking salt. Quite simply, salt makes bland food taste better. Now, I know, everyone's like a nutritional expert these days, and people are like, oh, I'm into my health, salt's so bad, it's pure evil. Salt's like the household version of an illegal, illicit street drug. You have to go get it from a dealer these days. You know, salt's so bad. Gone are the days when eating salty fast food was fun. Now you go to McDonald's, you have to book yourself into counseling, or you know, you go for a shawarma, you've got to go for confession afterwards. But let's face it, a little bit of salt makes your food taste better. And the same was true in Jesus' day, in Jesus' culture. In fact, we read in the Bible that even the long-suffering Job found some relief by putting some salt on his eggs. It made his life taste a little bit better in Job 6:6. Salt makes bland food taste good. And you are the salt. Salty Christians make a bland life taste better. You see, we read in the New Testament, especially in John's Gospel, that Jesus didn't just give us an ordinary, mundane, and boring life. No, Jesus called us to live an extraordinary, extravagant, fulfilled, rich, and abundant life. And that kind of rich, abundant life, when you really get it, you can't hold on to it and keep it to yourself. It can't be contained. It just has to overflow. It just has to spill out and be shaken out on your friends and your family and the people around you, overflowing and enhancing and seasoning and improving the life of those around you. You're being salty. You're enhancing the flavor of life when you smile at the checkout girl in the supermarket and you're patient and you're kind as you're going through. You're being salty. You're enhancing the flavor of life when you tip the waiter well. You're being salty and enhancing the flavor of life when you connect with a new person at church and you listen to them and you talk to them and you share life with them and you have a conversation with a visitor at HTBB. You're enhancing the flavor of life when you look out for how you can meet your neighbor's needs. See, the Christian life should be the most flavorsome life there is. And we should be shaking out the salt to enhance the lives of the people around us, making life just a bit better for them, making life just a bit more flavorful than a life that's simply lived for the self, turned in on the self. That kind of life is just bland. You are the salt. Shake out some of that salt, that abundant life flavor on the people around you. And you are exactly what this world needs. Number 3, when life feels lifeless and unfruitful, you are the salt. You are the fertilizer of life. Now, here's an explanation that doesn't make it into many commentaries. When Jesus says you are the salt, he means you are the fertilizer of life. Now, often in the Greek text of the New Testament, the words of something and for something are exactly the same. So the way it's translated is ambiguous. In Matthew 5, we read, "You are the salt of the earth." But there's no reason why that couldn't read, "You are salt for the earth." You are salt for the earth. You are like a fertilizer. And of course, that would fit in really well with the parables of Jesus, set in a farming and agricultural society. The idea of sowing and reaping and fruitfulness, the idea of salt fertilizer would be very common. Let's look at Luke's version of Matthew 5:13, if we can get it up. It's found in Luke chapter 14, verses 34 to 35. And here it reads this: "Salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is not fit to be trampled underfoot." You see the difference? It's not fit for the soil. It's not fit for the manure pile. It's just thrown out. Isn't that interesting, the difference there? Isn't that interesting? What Jesus is saying here is that unsalty salt, worthless salt, no good salt is not fit to be trampled underfoot. It's not fit to be trampled into the soil. It's not fit to be mixed in with the manure on the manure pile. But salty salt, good salt, should be trampled underfoot. It should be trampled into the soil. It should be mixed into the manure pile. Isn't that interesting? You see, Jesus isn't just talking here about sodium chloride, natrium chloride, that refined table salt. That's not the only kind of salt. The main type of salt in the land where Jesus lived was salt potash. And that salt's primary purpose was to be mixed in with manure. It was to be mixed into animal poo and then dug into the soil around your crops, around your plants, around your vegetables. And it acted as a powerful fertilizer. The ancient historians, Virgil and Pliny, they spoke about salt potash fertilizer being used in the ancient Near East. What does salt fertilizer do? Salt fertilizer brings life. It brings growth. It brings seeds into maturity. And it brings forth fruit. You are the salt for the earth. You are the salt for the earth. Shake out that salt. Get dug in. Get trampled into the ground. Get stuck in and dug into the soil of the lives of your friends. Get dug into the lives of your families. Start to fertilize the seeds of the gospel in the lives of the people around you. Get dug in. Get trampled underfoot. Get mixed in with the lives of the people around you, your families, your colleagues, and start to help bring fruit to growth in their lives. You are salt of the world, but you are salt for the world. And the world needs you to fertilize it, to bring forth new life and growth and fruit. So shake out that salt. Number 4, life can hurt, but you are the salt. You are the medicine. Let's face it, we've all picked up a few hurts along the way, a few bumps, a few scratches along the journey of life. But salt is medicinal. Salt is healing. Salt water has been used for thousands of years as medicine to heal wounds. The ancient Egyptians used salt as a medicine. So did the Romans. Even the great Greek physician Hippocrates used salt as a medicine. The prophet Ezekiel in the Old Testament records that salt was used as a medicine in childbirth. And the best way to cure a sore throat is not to go to the hospital and get antibiotics. Don't do that. Just gargle on some salt water. It is healing. And you, Jesus says, you are the salt of the world. You are the salt gargle bringing healing to those who have no voice. You are the salt gargle that brings healing to those who cannot speak, whose voices have been taken away. Whenever you listen to the pain and hurt of a person in need with your arm around their shoulder, you're being that salt. You're being that restoring salt water. You are called to be isotonic. You are called to be the 100 plus of the world. The rehydration drink for a dry and dehydrated world in need. You are called to be the saline drip for a world that's gone and gotten itself burnt. And you know, you're that kind of salt whenever you pray for someone, whenever you pray for the refreshing life and water of the Holy Spirit, whenever you pray for the healing life of the Spirit to come and heal someone, you're being that kind of salt. You're shaking out that salt, and you are exactly what the world needs. And in a moment, we're going to respond in prayer, and we're going to invite people to come up for some of that healing that Jesus offers, some of that restoration. Finally, number 5, you are the salt. You are of great value to God. You are the salt. You are a friend of Jesus. Did you know that the word for your monthly pay packet, the word salary, comes from the Latin word for salt, salarium? And there was a practice where Roman soldiers were given money to buy salt with. It was called the salarium. It's where the popular phrase, "you're worth your salt," comes from. It means that that person is worth their pay. In fact, the practice goes back 2,400 years to ancient Turkey in the first soldier's oath. This oath for swearing in new soldiers, where new soldiers would be paid on day one by salt in the hand as a promise of their payment, of their value and their commitment. You see, salt was of incredibly high value in the ancient world. In fact, salt played a really important role in determining the rise and power of cities and empires. Liverpool, my hometown, it rose from being just a small English port to being a significant, important city of the British Empire by taking the salt from Cheshire and exporting it across the world. Salt is so valuable. And when Jesus says to you, you are the salt, what he's saying is this: you are of incredible value to Jesus. You are the salt. You are of incredible worth to him. Do you know that? When Jesus says you are the salt, he's saying you are so precious to me. You have so much value to me. You are worth your weight in salt to me. You are such great value to me. That's what he says about you. He says you are salt. You are of value to him. And finally, when Jesus says you are salt, he's saying you are my friend. You are salt means you are my friend. In the ancient Near East, a pact of friendship was always sealed with a gift of salt. Even today in Arabia, if you ask a Bedouin shepherd if someone is a true friend, they will say, yes, we have eaten salt together. They're a true friend. In Persian, Urdu, and Hindu cultures, the term for someone who betrays a friendship is namak haram, literally one who has betrayed salt, one who is unfaithful to salt. The promise of friendship between God and his people in the Old Testament on a number of times is sealed with a covenant of salt in the Old Testament. Can you see in the Old Testament, in the ancient world, salt was this symbol of covenant friendship, of faithful friendship. Faithfulness is saltiness. Faithful friends are salty friends. And Jesus is here saying, you are salt, you are my friend. Isn't that amazing? Jesus calls you friend. You are salt, you are of immense value to Jesus. You are his friend. He is a faithful friend. He will never let you down. And that means, this is amazing, you are his salt. You are his salt. You are his sign of how he values the world. You are his sign of the friendship that he offers to your friends and your family. You are his salt. Let him shake you out. Let him shake you out on a world in need. Let him be the one that uses you to preserve people, to enhance life, to bring healing, to fertilize, to bring growth, and to heal this world. You are his salt, incredibly valuable to him. Amen. Amen. Would you like to stand with me? And we're going to respond in prayer. I wonder if the worship team can come up and if we can have the ministry team ready. You are the salt of the earth. What a wonderful image of healing. And I would love you to come and respond to healing if you have anything at all that you need praying for. Jesus is our healer, and he is here today to heal us. And I think that's not just physical, it is physical, but I wonder if some of you feel like you've lost that voice. You've lost that ability to speak out and have an impact. Jesus wants to restore your physical and your spiritual voice today. I wonder if you want to speak out into your family and you say those words. Maybe you're the only Christian in your family. You want to invite a family member to Alpha or to church. He wants to give you that gift of what to say today. He wants to give you that thing to say in your workplace if you're the only Christian. So we would love to pray for you and pray that we and you can be salt together in our homes, in our families, in our workplaces.